Well, I think it's clear what happened. Alec had the gun in his hand. He shot it. Helena was killed. Now, do we have the video? We don't have it all yet, but the gun cannot fire unless the trigger is engaged and the hammer is back. So he had the gun. He says he pulled the hammer back. It fired. She was killed.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. The day after legal counsel for Helena's family held a press conference to announce a new suit on behalf of the family, the fifth Rust suit, but the sixth currently pending suit against Alec Baldwin, Baldwin and his wife Hilaria were spotted walking the streets of New York City. Baldwin is back in town. Baldwin seems to have wrapped on his other film and is now back in the United States. While some articles refer to Baldwin in denial, he appears fairly haggard in these paparazzi photos. Based on the latest suit in particular, expressing unequivocally that they are seeking, quote, substantial liability, end quote, the thought has to have occurred to the actor that there is at least a possibility that he may have to pay millions in damages. I'm not a legal expert when it comes to wrongful death suits, that's civil law, but one wonders how much treasure the various counsels are thinking about. How much is reasonable? 10% of Baldwin's fortune? 20%? 25%? The other side of the equation is that Baldwin is able to afford really good counsel himself, and based on what we've already seen, one wonders whether there will be a strategy to drag this out, to try the resolve and test the patience of those that are pursuing these legal actions. And what are the express strategies from Hutchins' attorney, Brian Panish? And that is the focus of today's episode. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So once again, I will be putting a link to the entire press conference. It's really interesting to watch in the description. It's around about half an hour. But in terms of this episode, we're going to look at 10 insights, really 10 highlights from that press conference. Now, of all the lawsuits Alec Baldwin currently faces, only one, the one from the victim's family, is a wrongful death suit. Wrongful death arises as a result of wrongful action, and this must necessarily be proven. A wrongful death suit can occur parallel to a criminal case. Sometimes the one case will pause and certain things will be off limits while other things are decided. You might also have certain witnesses that are unwilling or would reserve the right not to testify, all sorts of things like that going on. But we saw that in the O.J. Simpson case, a civil suit following a criminal trial. O.J. won his criminal case, but he lost his civil case against Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman, and he was liable for damages there, I think, in excess of, was it $30 million? Anyway, a sizable sum. Now, in a wrongful death case, the defendant's wrongful action may be intentional or as a result of negligence. It's also possible that given the circumstances surrounding the Rust incident, one might have a similar scenario to a medical malpractice suit, meaning it could involve a critical failure to diagnose, to acknowledge, to respond appropriately to a given set of information from someone who kind of is vested with that responsibility, as a doctor would be in a medical situation. The legal situation in this particular case feels like it might actually involve elements of all three of the stipulations mentioned above. A certain amount of intent and intentionality, for example, proceeding with filming despite expressed safety concerns, negligence, possibly particularly with regard to making sure the weapon was safe, or not making sure it was safe, and not pointed at anyone, and then also failures by those responsible for the production, perhaps to manage the set in a particular way, following protocols, making sure that they followed. And now we're going to deal with those 10 insights from the press conference one by one, starting with
Mr. Baldwin was the person holding the weapon that, but for him shooting it, she would not have died.
this will likely be the central offense, the central offensive from the prosecution, and also the central defense from Baldwin's defense counsel. It will be a contest of experts and narratives to say either Baldwin pulled the trigger or that he didn't. One interesting legal question, I think, is even if you do away with Baldwin pulling the trigger, if you say he didn't pull the trigger, he didn't point at anyone either, nevertheless, the weapon was pointed at someone. And shouldn't there have been someone who could have made sure that that didn't happen in a crowded room? Nevertheless, it did fire. Couldn't there have been someone who could have prevented that from happening? Nevertheless, it had a live round in it, not because it was properly checked, but because it wasn't.
The amount of damages will be substantial.
A few minutes after saying those words, Panish reiterates, he says, so clearly he has a significant portion of liability, and that is a reference to Alec Baldwin. It's their position that Baldwin has quote-unquote significant or quote-unquote substantial liability in this case. But what do you think about the qualifier here? Is it clear? Can you really say he clearly has a significant portion of liability? Baldwin's defense will probably stress that it isn't clear, that it wasn't clear, that Baldwin wasn't omniscient, that he didn't know everything that was going on the set. What do you think? Is it clear?
We haven't got to the discovery process yet.
So, number 3, do the lawyers already know the outcome of the investigation? And so he says there we haven't actually got to the discovery process yet. And he does say that there would obviously be a lot more evidence, a lot more information from the investigative side than from their side. And so it would obviously help their case to know what the outcome of the investigation is. It would appear that they don't know the outcome of the investigation right now, but just bear in mind a wrongful suit is determined by a civil court. It's not a criminal court. It is possible, and I think inevitable, that a criminal investigation may provide reinforcement for a civil case. Number 4.
The courts in Santa Fe move cases much faster, so I think we will be in trial within 1.5 to 2 years.
Will there be a trial? Will there be a settlement? Given the stakes, I suspect a trial is quite likely. Baldwin probably can't afford the negative publicity of a trial or even the long period, this long sort of arc of getting to the trial proper. But on the other hand, he may feel he can't afford to settle either, especially for the substantial amount that they seem to be talking about. By avoiding trial, by settling, he might be able to shave a few additional millions off the cost of a trial, off paying for expensive a defense attorney. But given what we saw in the parking lot debacle and how long that took to resolve, even though it was settled, I think the appetite for litigation from the prosecutor's side, as well as the scale and scope of the grievance, this is a shocking crime that has taken place. It wasn't just one person who got injured either, and something that affected a whole bunch of people. I think the grievance is much greater here. It's also the treasure that is, I guess, available to the attorneys is also, it's a big cherry in a way, and that holds allure power as well. I also think it's interesting that Brian Panish described his client Matt Hutchins as resilient, as if he's saying he's not going to be worn down. He's going to stick this out over the long haul and go to trial if it comes to that. Number 5.
In New Mexico, we're used to people from coming in from out of town to play cowboy who don't know how to use guns.
So that is the gist of what Nicolas Cage said as well. He seemed to be implying that Alec Baldwin didn't know how to use a gun. It does seem that that is the prosecution's case. It's going to be that Baldwin didn't know how to handle a gun properly, or that he simply didn't handle it properly. Baldwin's defense on ABC News seemed to be that it wasn't really up to him. He was a passive player. He was trusting his assistant director. He was told that he was handed a cold gun. He was quite emphatic about that, and that's apparently enough. I was told it was a cold gun. That's where his responsibility begins and ends. And then also that the cinematographer told him to point the gun effectively at her. So he's the passive player in all this. And in a passive scenario like this, there's this idea that the responsibility shifts to everyone else giving the orders. Wasn't he giving any orders? So I don't know how convincing the passive player argument is going to be given what we know so far. Is Baldwin, generally speaking, a passive person? Is he a passive guy who does what he's told? When he's asked to hand in his cell phone, does he do that? When the investigation is ongoing, does he wait passively for the results of it? How about on a movie set? I don't know. I guess we'll find out. That brings us to number 6.
And the jury in Santa Fe is used to that and understands that certainly never pointed at anybody. You always assume that it's loaded.
I don't know whether this is a broadside to say basically take this trial to New Mexico and you'll lose, or that Hutchins's counsel are sort of salivating at the prospect of what they imagine will be a legal slam dunk, that they think this is going to be an easy win for them. What do you think? Number 7.
And there are real cowboys in Santa Fe.
This was a almost incidental postscript uttered by Randi McGinn, basically reinforcing the notion that, firstly, real cowboys know how to handle guns, and perhaps that was a slight dig at Baldwin for, also his failure to pull off even a pretend cowboy story. And that brings us to number 8.
But we're not running down those rabbit holes. We're going straight ahead with this lawsuit for this family against these defendants.
Brian Panish is right that each lawsuit presents a series of rabbit holes, and it's a ripe situation for confusion. Is everyone guilty or is no one? Is everyone blaming everyone else? Easy to kind of get muddled in that scenario. The reality is some people on a movie set are more accountable for things than others. Why? Well, based on their position. Just like in any company, responsibility for that company's strategies increases as one moves to the top. Number 9.
But I would expect this case to last for up to a month. There's many, many witnesses.
Given the scale of the legal battle, if you were Alec Baldwin, would you back yourself and your charisma and your, your credit, your social currency, I guess, with, bear in mind he's got about 2.5 million followers on Instagram. Would you back yourself and your charisma over a jury in court? Knowing Baldwin, who is quite a scrapper, quite a sort of take no prisoners kind of person, quite a confrontational personality, do you think he'll sort of back down and do something kind of settle quietly? Or do you think he'll lose face and settle, or risk losing even more face in the public spectacle of a trial? And look at what he's just done following all of this. He's gone to kind of make a movie in England, and you could say he's risking losing face, but it also seems as though he is asserting himself and trying to gain or maintain the respect and the adoration and the audience that he's achieved thus far. So what do you think? Do you think he would want to go to trial or that he would avoid it? So a couple of other things that were mentioned. Someone asked, is it true that the gun was used for target practice? I think the answer to that question could actually make or break this case. More break the case if that they can actually prove that. If they can prove that the gun that he used was actually being used willy-nilly by people. It was lots of live rounds were put in it, and it was sort of having fun and an off day. If that was actually taking place, that would cast a shadow that would definitely be a difficult thing to get out of or get out from under a scenario like that, if that is in fact true. And so Panish said we're not getting into that today. He was also asked, have you had a chance to examine the actual gun? Very good question. He said, no, we have not. He said that is still in possession of the DA. And then he said something very interesting. He said, we don't think the weapon is what caused this or any defect in the weapon. It is possible that the answer to whether Baldwin fired or the mechanism of the gun, firing itself, that could be determined by x-raying and carefully examining the weapon. But I'm not sure, even in the likely event, let's say you studied the weapon and you found, wow, this weapon is defective. I don't know whether that would change much. There's still things like pointing the firearm. There's still the fact that there's a live round inside it. There's still 2 or 3 people not properly checking the weapon. There are still all the other discharges leading to the fatal one. And kind of earlier on, probably at the beginning of the press conference, the lawyer was asked probably the best question of all, what do you think is the most important single piece of evidence? And this is what he answered.
I think it's all a culmination of all the evidence together. The totality of it is just so overwhelming.
And I wonder if that isn't quite a good description for the legal case in the Barry Morphew case. What do you guys think? So I'm not going to take it further than that, but I do want to ask you guys, did I miss anything from that press conference, something that was raised that from the council that you thought was particularly important and interesting? Well, if I did, make a note in the comments. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.